gorgeous. Good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. Huh?
Illuminating.
Illuminating. That's probably better than, what did I say? Yeah. We are learning Maseches Pesachim Daf Peches. We're starting about 2/3 from the bottom of Pei Zayin and Beis, in the very, very thick portion of the bottom of the page, almost halfway down. We are starting with Amar Rav Yochanan Mishum Shem ben Yochai. And this is going to just say one more nakuda about Hosea that we focused on yesterday, where Hosea did not do a good job of playing defense for the Jewish people when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Banecha chatu, and he said, okay, Hosea is like, okay, they did a bad job, go switch out this nation for another one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked him to marry Gomer Bas Divlaim, who was not a woman of wonderful repute. And then Hashem told Hosea, okay, now that you've had 3 kids with her, time to divorce. He's like, I can't do that. That's not right. So Hashem says, neither can I. And the Jewish people, at least I know they're my children. But if they're Ben Zanunim, if your children are Ben Zanunim, you don't even know that they're your children. She's a Zona. You have no way of knowing. So one more story about Hosea, and then on to some other agaritas before we get to some halachic gemaras. So about 10 lines into the wide lines. Amar Rav Yochanan Mishum Shem ben Yochai. My dichsiv, what do the following 2 psukim mean? Number 1, Al tal shein eved al Adonai pen yikalelcha v'ashmos. Maybe you should not speak lashon hara about an eved to his master, lest you be found to be guilty. Uchsiv, in the next pasuk writes, Doraviv yikalel v'asimcha lo yivarech. There's a nation of people who curse their fathers and who don't bless their mothers. So it says the Gemara, what's the juxtaposition for? Mishum da'aviv yikalel v'asimcha lo yivarech al tal shein. One is dependent on the other. When you live in a generation where people are not respectful to their parents, therefore you shouldn't say lashon hara. That can't be pshat. Ella, halfway down on the wide lines, Ella afilu dor she'aviv yakalel v'asimo lo yivarech. Even in a place where the people are bad, afal pikin, you should not speak lashon hara about them. Al tal shein eved al adonav minol. And how do we know this is true? Me Hosea, because Hosea did exactly this. The Jewish people weren't so geshmak at that time, but he did not. But he spoke lashon hara about them, and that was very bad. He spoke negatively about them, and he got what should have been a musar, but he did get musar, but he ended up getting tshuva as well. The Gemara now continues with an analysis of the fact that we're scattered all over the world and some of the silver linings therein. Amar Rav Yeshua, my dichsiv tzidkas pirzono b'Yisrael, that the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the tzidkus of a Kadosh Baruch Hu pirzono in the open cities of Yisrael. Play on words. We'll see the word is not going to be pure zone in the drasha. Tzedakah asa Kadosh Baruch Hu b'Yisrael shepizaron lebein ha'umos. It was considered a tzedakah, a gift that a Kadosh Baruch Hu put the Jewish people spread out among the nations. V'hainu da'amar le'ahu mina l'Reb Chanina. This is like one heretic said to Reb Chanina. What did he say? Anan ma'alinan minaychu. We're better than you. Why are we better than you? When you guys were in battle with Edom, it took you 6 months to decimate Edom. However, we have to tolerate you Jews. You guys have lived here for many years. So we're better than you. We're nicer than you are. You killed out Edom. We haven't killed out you. So Amar Lo, the Rebbe said, Reb Chanina said, I'm going to sick one of my talmidim on you. He can deal with you. I'm not dealing with it. The top of Rabbi Oshaya, the Amora, he sent Rabbi Oshaya. Amar Le, Mishum dolo yedatichu hecha ta'avidu tachlinun kulhu leisnu gabaychu. Yeah, you didn't know how to get rid of us because you have some of us living among you. But not all of us live among you. If you would have had all of us, you could have killed us all. But my diika gabaychu. But if we live by you and we live in other countries as well, so then it would be bad for you to kill us. It's a bad political move because kari luchu malchusak tiyasa. Then you're considered to be a very bad nation. You're wiping out a portion of your people. The art scroll refers to this as a genocidal type of government. Strong language.
This is what Amashir said to Haman when Haman suggested wiping out all the Jews. Right. But Amashir said that, but then they'll call me Malchus K'tiyasa.
Yeah.
He proved to him since he will be.
So that dialogue that you're quoting might be the backdrop for the next line of the Gemara, because this min, said back to now the Talmud of Oshia, Gapa de Ramai, this is a language of Shavua, from their language of Shavua. This was our Shakla V'Tarya. We want to wipe out the Jews, but if we do, it's bad politics for us. So maybe better to leave them.
So Haman said, since you rule the whole world, you wipe them all out.
If you would, that's right.
Nobody else cares if the Jews are.
Right. Exactly right. So this was the svara that the nations of the world. Yeah. So I didn't see it in the context of what you just said about Achashverosh, but that makes perfect sense. And it fits in the psukim perfectly. Just fits perfectly. We're at the 2 dots, 10 lines or so from the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Beis. Says the Gemara. Tani Reb Chia, what does the pasuk mean? Elokim evin darka b'hu yadas mekomah. Kadosh Baruch Hu understood, and the Torah understood its way, and the Torah knew its place. What does that mean? Yodea Kadosh Baruch Hu as Yisrael she'ein yichol lekabel gzeres achzarios Edom. The Jewish people would not have been able to tolerate the difficult cruelties of Edom. Lefichach, therefore, hegla osam leBavel. We were therefore put back into Bavel instead of in Edom. V'amar Rebbe Lazar lo higla Kadosh Baruch Hu. As Yisrael Bavel, El Mimnei Sha'amuka Kishol, it has a very deep landscape. Shne'emar Miyad Sha'ol Eftem. That's where the Jews are going to be redeemed from. Imaves Egalem, from death, they will be redeemed. Next, Rav Chanina Amar Mipnei Shekarav Lashonim Lelashon Torah, because the language of Aramaic is very similar to them. That's what we're doing literally right now. We're reading a blended language of Hebrew and Aramaic. It's like speaking in Yeshivish, like you kind of weave in Yiddish words. It's so close, or maybe it's part of the parlance, but here it's mamish, the same letters, it's the same pronunciations with different grammatical rules, but by and large, it's a very similar language. So that's one of the reasons why Kadosh Baruch Hu, to make it easier for us to learn Torah. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shigra on the Beis Iman. It's like you get married, and then when things are difficult, you get sent back home. And in fact, this is not good shalom bayis advice. I don't know, the following line is not going to be found in any modern books, but mashal adam shekas hal ishto lahechan mishagra. If a husband's upset with his wife, where should he send her? Sweetheart, hop out, you're done. So when they're in the middle of the fight, where does she go? The Beis Iman. So that's why it's the same thing. Like you get sent back to the Beis Iman. This is where you were before you were in the Beis Hamikdash, and now that you need to be kicked out, you're going to go back to where you came from. V'hainu Rabbi Alexandri. The Amar Shlosha Chazar Lemitasan. There are 3 things that go back to their source. Elohein Yisrael, the Jewish people in Galus, as we just saw. Kesef Mitzrayim, the money, the spoils that the Jews got from Mitzrayim. The Uchsav Luchos, and the letters from the first Luchos when they were broken. Yisrael Hada Amra. The Yisrael, the first of the 3 that Rabbi Alexandri says goes back to their roots. The first is the Jews, that when things are not going well in Eretz Yisrael for the Jews, when we were kicked out, we go back to Bavel. Kesef Mitzrayim. How do we know about Kesef Mitzrayim that the money went back? The pasuk indicates that they took the money from the Mikdash and brought it back down. And Tana Luchos Nishbravos Parchos, that the letters flew back up. All the way back up, whatever that means, they flew back up. I don't know, is it literal, is it conceptual? The luchos, they were carved out. It wasn't actual letters, it was a lack of rock. So this obviously is not literal, but it's something, it means something. Hard to understand exactly what. Bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Beis, last line. Ula Amar, what's with Bavel? Why did we move there? Because they had dates there. Rashi says Yesh Bavel Harbe, and it was a sweet food. It was a sugary food. It had some calories. It made it easier to sit and learn. That's what he's talking about. Ula Ikla Pumbedisa. When Ula went to Pumbedisa, Krivu Le Tirina de Tamre. Tirina, Rashi says, is a solid basket. They brought him a basket of dates. Amar Lahu, he said to them, what's the going rate? Kama kihani bezuza. How much do you charge dates per zuz? Amar Le tlas bezuza. You can get 3 for 1 zuz. Amar, he's like, wow, that's amazing. Malay tzana de dufsha bezuza. You can get a basket's worth for a cheap amount of money. Ubavloi lo aske bel raisa. How could it be that people don't learn around the clock here? It's so easy. You don't even need that much money to sustain yourself. Go sit and learn. Why isn't everybody just banging down the walls of the base mentorship? Everyone should be sitting and learning. A little bit later that night, all the food sank in, all the dates sank in, and it was not kishmak. The lel yotza aru, he had terrible stomach pains. Amar, then he's like, Malay tzana de sama de mavsa bezuza bebavel. Wow, this cheap stuff that they gave me tore up my stomach. And then he argued the opposite. How do they ever learn? If this is the food, they have to go work now. They can't eat these things. They're terrible for you. So he quickly shifted his mindset. In the beginning, he was giving Musa that they don't learn enough. In the end, he was giving a compliment. How do you ever get any learning done? You can't eat this food. You got to go make money. So the Meforshim explained that the food, the market price for food in Bavel must have been higher than normal. And just that this one food was cheap, because otherwise, what's the argument? Go buy another cheap food. No, there weren't a lot of cheap foods. Everything was a little bit more pricey. Okay, fine. V'amar Rebbe Lazar, next. There were many nations that came along. They're going to go up to Har Hashem. Why did they call Har Hashem Beis Elokei Yaakov? Elokei Yaakov, Elokei Avram v'Yitzchak. What about the other forefathers? Why just Yaakov? Says the Gemara, because of what's going on in the Psukim. Elokei Avram shekasu bo Har. By Avram it says Har. By Shenemar Asher Yomar Hayom Bahar Hashem Yireh Lo Yireh. It's also not the same as Yitzchak, because by him it says Sadeh, famous pasuk from the Gemara in Brachos that speaks about Tefillah Shenemar V'Yitze Yitzchak L'Suach B'Sadeh, and Ela Ki Yaakov, the Beis Hamikdash Shekaru Bayis Shenemar V'Yikru Hashem Hamakomahu Beis El. So that's why the pasuk is in reference to Yaakov and not to the other. What does it have to do with the Gemara? It doesn't connect to anything seemingly. Not so simple. It doesn't really fit at all. About 15 lines down or so, Peches Medalef. Amar Rav Yochanan Gadol Kibbutz Galios. The day of Kibbutz Galios, Kiyom Shenivru Ubo Shamayim Va'aretz, is equivalent, either historically or hashkafically or practically in some way, to Shamayim Va'aretz. Shenemar B'nei Kibutzu B'nei Yehuda B'nei Yisrael Yachdav. V'samu lehem rosh echad ve'alu mina aretz ki gadol yom Yisrael, and the word yom uksiv v'hi erev v'hi boker yom echad. The word yom is used in both places, so therefore we see an equivalence. Again, this isn't really flippant. It's not just because the word yom is there. There's something deeper going on here. The word yom is all over the place in the Torah. We see it all the time, but it's not stam. And I've mentioned this before, that one of my Rebbe Mufak of David Miller in Eretz Yisrael used to say all the time, this was the one thing in Shas he never got a tfisa on. How did the Chachamim know how to do these things? Where did they learn how to do this? Was it arbitrary? I wanted to sound beautiful, so I'm comparing. No, of course not. There's a rich Masorah here. It's just that we're not tapped in. So that was part of the Yeridas Hadoros, is that we, other than the rules of the Yud Gimel Midos Shator Nidreshes and the Yud Gimel Midos that we know that we use to extract from the Torah as concepts, but the nuance and the real sensitive part of the darshaning is very hard to understand. Nevertheless, we should not be looking at this in a casual way. The words yom here are really quite specific. We are at the next two dots, and we are jumping back into some halachic things. We had said in our Mishnah, which is at the beginning of the Perika Isha, we said, and we're at the two dots, third of the way down, Yasom sheshachto olav aputropsim, that had it been that there was a Yasom, and whoever his guardian was making the Korban Pesach on his behalf. So if we were to look back in the Mishnah, it would say, Yochal b'makom shu rotze, he can eat wherever he wants, no problem. Says the Gemara, if he's eating wherever he wants, if that's true, shamas mina yesh brera, as we spoke about yesterday, we see here that he has some choices. And if he has a choice to choose at the time of the achila, it implies that we're retroactively determining what the machshava was b'shas shchita. And that it seems to be that yesh brera. Brera is always a today moment that's reflecting on a past moment, and we're making a decision retroactively. Says the Gemara, lav dafka, amar abzera selabais mikol makom, that when you're dealing with a case like this, it's selabais, it applies to the whole home, and therefore you cannot bring a raya from here by yesh brera or ein brera, because it's selabais mikol makom, that anyone who lives in the house is part of this korban. So how does it work? Everybody who lives in a house all of a sudden is caught under the korban of the father. Is that how it works? So we're going to learn two brises now and then analyze a little bit to see how this works. Tanu Rabbanan, the brisa writes, I think it's a brisa. What does this one say here? Yeah, the brisa writes selabayis, that the sheep is for the house. Melamed she'adam mevi v'shochet. He's allowed to bring the korban pesach for the following: al yedei beno uvito haktanim, his young children. Al yedei avdo v'shivchaso hakananim. They have some partial minor halachic status. Bein midaiton, bein shalom midaiton. You don't even have to ask him. Stam das, just regular. They're spacing out. They have no idea. And the balabas, or the father of the young children, or the father, or the adon, the master of the avadim kananim, they're bein midaiton, bein shalom midaiton. They're included in the korban pesach. So the natural assumption, without explicating, is that they're included. Aval, the balabas is not allowed to do the following. Eino shochet al yedei beno uvito hagdolim. You cannot just simply assume that your older children are included. These people who have a greater halachic status, they're more independent in their halachic ways. They need to know what's going on. I need to know what's going. This is a shaila that comes up by Ataras Nadarim, by Erev Rosh Hashanah. Do you have to ask your spouse, dafka? Is it assumed? So we're asking the question of, do we have to explicate, or can it be just an assumption? So we said that if the people are ketanim, or if they're avadim kenanim, bein bedaitan, bein shalom daitan, we don't have to ask them anything. The stam knowledge is that they are included. But here, when it's older children, or if it's an eved ivri, or if it's one's wife, that's only midaitan. Tanya idach. We have another brisa, 2/3 of the way down. Lo yishchot adam lo yadei beno vito hagdolam v'lo yadei avdo v'shivchaso ha'ivriim ve'al yadei ishto el midaitan. These older children, the avodim ivriim and a person's wife, el midaitan, they all have to have das. They have to know what's going on. You can't just assume that they're included in the Korban Pesach. Aval, it's just a reversal of the previous brisa, though we will see some nuance. It didn't exist in the previous brisa. Aval, shochet hu al yedei beno uvito aktana ba yedei avdo v'shivchaso aktana be'midaitam v'shalom midaitam. When it comes to people who are young children, avadim kinaanim. So then in those cases, it's bein midaitam, bein shalom midaitam, even a stam das, even without them having a specific knowledge, we assume on their behalf that the Korban Pesach works for them, and Taka does. However, 3 lines before the wide lines. If somebody shechs their own korban, and then as well the shachat rabban aleihan, and as well their master or father makes a korban on their behalf, yotzin b'shal rabban ve'ein yotzin b'shal atzmon. Their own doesn't even work. Chutz, except for a woman. Chutz min ha'isha she'echol limchos. She could make her own korban and it would work for her, and then she wouldn't follow her husband's. So says the Gemara, what does that mean? Ma'ishna isha. What's the difference, halachically speaking, between a man's wife and his older children, or his avodim ivrim, as it relates to this particular halacha? If we know that a person's older children and that avodim ivrim and that an isha, we have to have specific intention to include them, and they have to know what's going on. So then why here in this second brisa does it say that a woman can exclude herself, but the others can't? Says the Gemara, Maishna, Isha, first of the long lines. Amar Rava, you're right. Isha v'chol damila. Everyone who's a gadol, so the older children above bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah, and the avodim ivrim, they are similar to a woman in this way, that if they make their own korban, then yichol and limchos, that would be a sign that they don't want to be a part of the husband's korban. Hagufa Kasha, the Gemara says that's an inherent stira in the brisa. Amris, first you said, chutz mina isha she'echol limchos. The brisa explicitly writes just 2 lines above where we are right now that a woman can be mocha. She could say, I'm not interested in taima demachi. But the reason why she is then excluded is because she contested the korban. Halo machi, but if she didn't, what's the implication? The nafka b'shal baila, then she would be yotze with her husband's korban. That's implication number 1. On the flip side, vaktani reisha, but the reisha says v'lo de ishto v'el midaitan hastama lo nafka. So it seems to be that there's a machlokas in the brisa about how to understand the stam nature of an isha. Is she included or is she excluded in the korban of her husband? So says the Gemara, maya el midaitan. What does it mean in the brisa when it says, in the first brisa, when it says "V'lo al yidei ishto elamidaitan," what does that mean? Labda amrein. She didn't say yes. It doesn't mean when it's midaitan that it's yes. It just means that she's stam. She's not opposed. So do we have to explicate and say yes, or is our stam das not negative and therefore good enough? That's what the Gemara was answering. It was elabistam alafuke heichada amarlo. So we're saying right now that in regards to an isha, in regards to a banim and benos of hagdolim and an eved ivri, that as long as their das is stam, they're included. That would be the understanding of the Gemara at this point, that they are included. 4 lines into the wide lines, 10 or 12 lines from the bottom. Peches medalev. V'hakulan sheshachtu. We said that if people bring their own korbanos, and then v'shachad rabban alein yotzim b'shal rabban. So what do we see over there? That's the bistama without them speaking about any intention. And then v'ktani chutz min ha'isha mimnei she'chol limchos. That's not stam anymore. She's showing her feelings. Amar Rabba, you're absolutely right. But kevan sheshachtu, it wasn't about her das. She made her own korban. She was shochet her own korban. Ein lecha michui gadol mizeh. Don't be confused by that. When we're talking about das, you're right. It's just a question of stam versus not negative. As long as it's not negative das, she's included. But if she does something be'einayim and she brings her own korban pesach, of course, then of course it's going to be considered a michui. It's going to be considered a macha, contesting, and she would not be yotze with her husband. Next 2 dots, 10 lines from the bottom. Eved shel shnei shutfin. We said that if an eved is owned by 2 people, so Rami le Rav Eina Saba, this person's name, Rav Eina Saba, and he asked the question le Rav Nachman. What was his question? Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Eved shel shnei shutfin lo yochal mishel shneihen. We said that an eved who's owned by 2 people can't eat from either of his bosses. There's another brisa that says the exact opposite. Take your pick. Baal number 1, Baal number 2. You get to pick, and it doesn't make a difference which one you pick. Everything is all good and fine. Omar Le, he said back to him, Eina Saba, Eina, the old man, Ve'amrila, Pasya Ukma, the blackened vessel. This was a term of endearment of people who used to sit so long that they started looking a little disheveled and dirty. The blackened vessel was not an insult. It was, wow, you mamish besitzfleisch, you're sitting there and you're learning for hours on end. You got to freshen up sometime. But it was a compliment in his learning. Miniu minachti time, we can conclude from our conversation, Shmaitasa masnisen b'dekapti ahadade. In our Mishnah, when we said that an eved that belongs to two people, that belongs to neither, that's when the masters are kapti ahadade. No one is willing to be giving and saying, you're not allowed to make it, I'm allowed to make it. And the other guy says, I'm allowed to make it, you're not allowed to make it. So when the bailim of this one eved are fighting about it, of course, they're kapti ahadade. That's why our Mishnah is strict. But the Brisa is where the two bailim of this eved agree with one another. Brisa, the lo kapte adade, they agree with one another. Everything is benachas, uvene'imus, good to go. No reason not to let him eat from either one. And that's why the Brisa allows the eved who belongs to two rabbanim, to two masters, is allowed to pick from which one he eats. But there is no machlokas. It's just a question of being specific and making sure that the eved is specifically appointed to either one korban or even to two, and then he can choose. Next 2 dots, 5 lines from the bottom. What about the reverse case? Not an eved who has two masters, but an eved who has two parts of himself. Misha chetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin, a person who's half and half. Half of his responsibilities are as an eved, and half are as a free person. Lo yochal mishal rabo, and the Gemara says there's a diuk from here. Mishal rabo hu de lo yochal, aval mishalat mo yochal. It's true he can't eat from his master's korban because he's half and half, but he should be able to bring his own korban. Yes, he's an inherent stira because part of him is ben chorin, part of him is an eved, but he should be able to eat his own korban. But that doesn't work because Tanya, the Brisa writes, lo yochal lo mishal lo mishal rabo. Yes, he is inherently conflicted, and someone who's chatzi eved and chatzi ben chorin, he can't be yotze, as we spoke about yesterday. There are a number of areas of halacha where it's very difficult for a person to be yotze, even themselves. So it says the Gemara, lo kashya, you're right. But don't worry, this is not a contradiction. Kan kimishna rishona, kan kimishna achrona. There was a first version of the Mishnah, and then there was a second version of the Mishnah. What really we're talking about here is the shita of Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel initially said one thing, and then they retracted in an uncommon form to follow the shita of Beis Shammai. What's the backstory? Says the Gemara as follows, 2 lines from the bottom, that's none. Misha chetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin. If you have an eved who's half and half, the case of our Mishnah, the case that we're struggling with, so then, oved es rabo yomechad v'es atzmo yomechad divri Beis Hillel. Half and half. It's just the way things are. It's the nature of his avdas, that he's half to himself, half to work 24 hours. Every 24 hours, he switches gears. Beis Shammai omrim, okay, takantem es rabo. You solve the problem for the master, I guess. The master knows how much he's allowed to utilize this eved who's chatzi ben chorin and chatzi eved. Got it. But ves atma lo takantem. The problem is that you've left this eved in a very difficult place. Why? Because Lisa shifcha enu yachol shekvar chetzu ben chorin. Can't marry another shifcha. Can't marry someone who's an equal slave, because he's partial ben chorin, and ben chorin can't marry a shifcha. And Lisa bas chorin, but to marry a bas chorin is also not allowed. Enu yachol shadayin chetzu eved. It says twilight zone. So it's very, very difficult. So Yevatel, what's he going to do? He's going to nullify. What is he going to nullify? He's going to nullify the mitzvah of having children. You have to bring children into the world, not the mitzvah of pru or vu, but a different pasuk. There's 2 mitzvahs deoraisa, according to most Rishonim. There are 2 mitzvahs deoraisa to have children. One is the mitzvah of pru or vu, machlokas in the Rishonim, how that is executed. Of course, we try, not always in control. Sometimes the answer is no. But when a person is zochet to have children, then we typically assume that a boy and a girl is a kiyum of the mitzvah saseh shel Torah of pru or vu. However, there's a secondary mitzvah to bring more children into the world. So says the Gemara, but this mitzvah applies even to an eved. But says Beis Shammai, it's not fair. This eved is stuck. You're trapping him from a mitzvah. So says the Gemara, Ela mipnei tikkun olam. Beis Shammai says in this brisa, but because of tikkun olam, kofen es rabo ve'oso so ben chorin ve'kosev shtar al chatzi dama. You have to make this person a ben chorin so that he can be yotze the mitzvah deoraisa of lasheves esaret, of lasheves yitzara, of having children. The chazur Beis Hillel lehoros ke Beis Shammai. And this is one of the cases where Beis Hillel turned back on their own shita and agreed with Beis Shammai to say, you're right, tikkun olam applies here. Tikkun olam is a hijacked terminology in some of the modern parlance of religions across the world. No, it is not this go with the flow type of thing. It's very specific. Tikkun olam in this frame is bringing children into the world within the framework of a mitzvah d'oraisa. Tikkun olam does not mean anything different than that in this context and should not be used in any other way. There's a very specific frame in which this is. I remember when I was in college at Loyola, every paper we wrote, we had to have a section on how this fits in with social justice. Every paper you came up with a new pshat in social justice, because it had to fit your paper. So that's not how Torah works. We have definitions of things. Tikkun olam is not arbitrary. Tikkun olam is specific. Next Mishnah, 10 lines down, Pei Ches Amud Beis. Ha'omer la'avdo tzei u'shchot alai es ha'pesach. So let's say that I have an eved, and I say, please go shecht for me a korban pesach, you're my shliach. Shachat gedi yochal. If he shechts for me a gedi, one type of animal, I'm allowed to eat it. Shachat tele yochal. I didn't specify the animal. I can eat either one of them. Shachat gedi utule. Let's say the eved shechts both of them on my behalf. Yochal min harishon. Only the first one counts. Shachach ma'amar lo rabo ketzad yasa. Let's say the eved forgot what the Rebbe said. What should he do? Yishchat tele ugdi. But yomer, he should shecht both, and he should say b'tnai. He should make a condition. Im gedi amarli. If really he said gedi, I can't remember which one he said. So then im gedi amarli Rebbe, then gedi shelo tele sheli. All right, if that's what he wants, that's what he gets. I'll take the other one. I don't care which one I have, and I'm the eved anyways. Im tele amarli Rebbe ha tele shelo ugdi sheli. He makes a condition. The Gemara is very bothered by this because we know a principle, Masha Kana Eved Kana Rabo. So what type of kinyan is he making on the other animal? The Gemara is going to ask that question. What if Shachach Rabo Ma'amar Lo? Comes back, he's got two animals in hand, but the master's like, I have no idea what I told you. What should we do? So the halacha is Shnein Yatzil Beis HaSreifa P'tur Milasos Pesach Sheni. Both of them go to the Beis HaSreifa. They both need to be burned. Namely, you're not allowed to eat them. However, you were Yotzei the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. We pointed this out earlier in the Masechta that the achila is not li'ikuva as long as you are in theory able to eat. If you are a chola or a zaken, then you're not allowed to bring the korban at all. But here you're able to eat. But we have a technical issue, which is that we don't know which animal is yours, and it's usher to eat from a korban from which you're not manui, because we know you have to be appointed to a specific korban. That might be an isser d'oraisa. So if that's the case, yes, you're yotze, but shneim yatzu the beis hasrei. So the Gemara says pshita. Of course, the first part of the Mishnah is so obvious. Shachad g'di yochal. That's obvious. Says Gemara, well, here's what's going on here. Yes, it's shachad g'di is yochal, that's true. But afal gav de regila b'tzleh. Even if it's true that you're used to eating another animal, we would still say these two animals are equivalent. Most people don't make a distinction between them. Shachad tzleh yochal afal gav de regila big din. If he takes a tzleh, it's also okay to eat that, even if you're ragil, the big din, to eat a different kind of animal. So it says the Gemara, there's an added word here. It should say ella shachad g'di utzleh yochal min harishon. So it says the Gemara, if in fact you shecht a g'di and a tzleh. So the Mishnah says you eat from the Rishon. Why? You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to have two korbanos Pesach. You can't be manui on two korbanos at the same time. So says the Gemara, fascinating answer, almost halfway down, 3 lines before the wide lines, must nisan b'melech u'malka. The halacha is that we're talking about our Mishnah. When it says that it's talking about a g'di u'tleh, it's talking about a melech and a malka who they have such fancy food, like from one day to the next. You eat in all the fancy restaurants, all the foods become less chashuv to you. This animal, then I'll have the other one tomorrow night. It's not a big deal. So all of them are considered equivalent. It's not considered to be manui on two things. And in fact, the brisa from which we asked is the brisa from which we now bring a raya. V'hatanya, this one is b'nichusa, as they write on the side. This v'hatanya is not a question. This v'hatanya is a raya. Nimnen al shnei psachim ke'echad. U'maisa b'melech u'malka. There was a story with a king and a queen. Sha'amru le'avdei and se'u v'shachtu aleinu es ha'pesach. And they said to their servants, go shech the korban pesach for us. V'yatzu v'shachtu aleinu shnei psachim. And they brought 2 korbanos pesach. So they didn't know what to do. They weren't familiar with the halacha. They hadn't learned this daf in Shas. Bo v'shalu es hamelech. Excuse me, they brought the question to the king and they said, what should we do? There's 2 korbanos. You're not allowed to be manui on 2 korbanos pesach. 2 lines into the wide lines. Amar lehem l'chu v'shalu es hamalka. Go ask the queen. She's in charge. She knows the answer to this question. Bo v'shalu min hamalka. So they said, queen, we don't know what to do. 2 korbanos were brought. What do you think we should do? Amar lehem l'chu v'shalu es Rabban Gamliel. Go ask the Posek Hador. Go ask the famous Rabbi Gamliel. He'll pass in for you. Bo v'shalu es Rabban Gamliel. Amar lehem malka umelech daitan kala len yochel min harishon. They don't care which animal they eat from. That makes no difference to them. Let them eat the first one. Anan, we, however, who are regular people, lo nochal, lo min harishon v'lo min hasheni. That's the raya to our Mishnah that we're talking about a case. We're talking about a melech and a malka that they were able to eat from the first one, but we would not be able to. Taka, that's the din. We would have learned from this answer of Rabban Gamliel that if we have two animals that are brought for us, if it's brought one at a time, no problem. But if they're brought two at a time, then for us, because we're regular people and we consume these foods rarely, so therefore we are not the melech and malka status, and therefore that would be the din, that by us, we would not be able to eat any of these animals if the two of them were brought together. Another story about the king and queen, though it's really a sidebar because it's not connected to our story, but a little bit of an interesting story. Halfway down, Pesachim says the Gemara, there's a lizard. It was found in the kitchen of the king and the queen. This animal has a status of tuma, and they wanted to be metame the entire meal. So they said to the king, what should we do? We found a lizard in the kitchen. They said, go to the queen. So they went to the queen. Go ask Rabban Gamliel. I don't know. You got to go ask the Gadol Hador. Also, they asked Rabban Gamliel what to do. When you found the lizard in the kitchen, was it a very hot place or was it a very cold place? So they said, Amr la rosech, it was by a very hot place in the kitchen. So Amr lahem l'chu v'hitilu aleha kos shel tzonim. So what you should do is you should go get a very cold cup of water and pour it on top of the lizard. Halchu v'hitilu aleha kos shel tzonim v'richsha. And when they poured the cold water on, they saw that the lizard was still alive. And the fact that the lizard was still alive means that it's not dead. And if it's not dead, then there's no tuma yet. It might be gross, but it's not tuma. Gross is not a halachic problem. Not in this case, at least. The tahar, v'tiher, Rabban Gamliel, kolasu the kula. Nimtza, melech talavi b'malka, that the king was dependent on the queen. V'nimtza malka tali b'Rabban Gamliel, and the queen was dependent on Rabban Gamliel. Nimtza kolasu the tluya b'Rabban Gamliel. Really, at the end of the day, this whole suda was talui on Rabban Gamliel. 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more. Shachach, masha amar lo rabo. If the Eved forgot what the Rebbe said, so we pointed out that he's allowed to make a condition. If my Rebbe said tleh, then the tleh is for him and the gedi is for me. And if he said gedi, then the gedi is for him and the tleh is for me. So says the Gemara, shali. How can he say shali? Mashakana eved kana rabo. He has no kinyanim. He has no kinyanim at all. It doesn't. It's a zero. So also in our own home with little children, if they're not b'nei in benos mitzvah for sure. If there's something on shulchan, it's a discussion in the poskim. Do children have property? Do they own things? This was a famous shiur. We've spoken about this a number of times. Just the reminder about the capacity of a child to make a kinyan is present, but to be makna is not present. So if you give your lulav and esrog on the first day of Yantiv, it's very problematic to give it to a katan. They should have their own a chinuch set, whatever it is. Because if they take yours and they make a kinyan, so then you can't get it back from them because they can be koneh, but they can't be makneh. So these are real shilos. So here in this case, this Eved is no different than that child. He's not allowed to have any kinyan. Mashakana Eved kana rabo. So how was he able to make the t'nai in our Mishnah? He made the t'nai in our Mishnah that if he forgot what to do, I'm going to make a t'nai. The tleh, if that's what he really wanted, he can have it. I'll take the gdi. So says the Gemara, how did we get around this? He went to a particular shepherd that he regularly used who liked to take care of his master. And to the Eved himself, he made one specifically. He gave one of those animals specifically to the Eved. In other words, if we're specific about the fact that he's making a kinyan that has nothing to do with the Rebbe, that doesn't incur the halachic principle of mashakana eved kana rabo. Not everything. It's not a sweeping rule. It's a general rule, but it doesn't apply to every last blessed thing. It doesn't mean that the eved can't have any kinyanin. As long as the kinyan that the eved made was specific to him and to the exclusion of his master, then it can be his, and therefore that's not in our Mishnah works. What about shachach rabo? Masha amarlo? So let's go back to our Mishnah. What did we say there? We said that they're yotze. They said that shneim yatzu lebeisas reifo upturin milasos pesach sheni. That was what we said, that the food needs to be burned. You can't eat it. And again, achila is not le'ikufa. It doesn't prevent you from fulfilling the mitzvah. And therefore, even though you can't eat it, but therefore, you're still yotze, the mitzvah, and therefore you don't have to do a pesach sheni. So, Amar Abaye seemingly was learning our Mishnah. We're going to see in a moment that we're not sure where Abaye's comment applies. Does it apply to our Mishnah or does it apply to a different brisa? We'll get to that momentarily, but let's see version 1 of Abaye. Amar Abaye, lo shanu, we did not learn this din of our Mishnah, Ella sheshachach achar zrika. We're only talking about a case where the master forgot which animal he wanted to have shechted when his forgetfulness was after the zrika. That when the blood was nizrak, he was in a good place. He knew it was a gedi up until then, and then he forgot. He couldn't remember gedi until after the zrika. Aval shachach lifnei zrika. But let's say the master forgot before the zrika. He's like, wait, I don't remember which animal I said. Is it a tzleh? Is it a gedi? So then the chi izrak dam lo havachazi la'achila. That if he doesn't know what animal he was talking about, so how could you? The zrika on the wrong animal is a 0. So what if he doesn't know which animal it is that he's supposed to shech? Which he's supposed to do the zrika sadaman, so that doesn't count at all. Then chayav and lasos pesach sheni. So that was Abaye's comment. Abaye's comment was that it really depends. If the Rav, if the master forgot what animal it was after the zrika, good to go. That's our Mishnah. But if you forgot which animal it was before the zrika, no dice. Then you need to do pesach sheni. Then you were not yotze at all. But ika demasni la abraisa. Some say that this qualification of Abaye was not set on our Mishnah. It was set on something totally different. Chamisha, what might Abaye have set his comment on the following brisa? Chamisha shenisarvu oros pischem zebazeh. There are five animals whose oros, whose skins, the skin that was nifshat from the animal, that was stripped from the animal, they all got mixed up. And then on one of them, they found some type of blemish on one of the animals, one of which would make the animal into a mum, into a balmum. So they're looking at these 5 skins, and one of them has a yabelas on them, a wart. So says the halacha, kulan yotz in the beis asrei v'uptur milasos pesach sheni. So there we say that, yeah, all 5 animals have to be burned. No one can eat them because we know that one of them has a blemish. We know that one of them has a blemish, and therefore they should all be burnt. But uptur milasos pesach sheni, because it all happened after the zrika. But did it? Let's see. Maybe this is where Abaye's distinction of before and after zrika came up. Amar Abaye, lo shanu, our case of the chamisha shenisarvu oros pischem zebazeh, the case where the 5 skins all got mixed up. Lo shanu ela shenisarvu la'achar zrika. It's only true if we found this out after the zrika. That at the time that the zrika was done, we didn't know about the yabelas, and all 5 animals were considered perfectly kosher. But if the skins got, you must have peeled very quickly, but if all the skins got mixed up right away in between the shchita and the zrika, and you found out before the zrika, 8 lines from the bottom, no, you're not exempt. That's not our Mishnah. So that's where Abaye, we're not sure which one he applies on. So then the Gemara says, well, let's see if we could compare the 2 cases of our Mishnah and the Brisa. Man demasni amas nisan kol sheken Brisa. According to the one who says Abaye applies to our Mishnah, it's all the more so true in regards to the Brisa that there would need to be a Pesach Sheni. Man demasni Brisa aval amas nisan lo. Our Mishnah is a little bit of a better scenario than the case of the skins. At least by our Mishnah, had he just remembered which animal it was, there was no flaw really in Mitzias. There was no flaw at all other than his knowledge. By the skins, there was actually a yabeles. There actually was a flaw that made the animal into a balmum. But by our case, there really was no flaw. So therefore, it's if in fact Abaye's din, his qualification was taught by the Brisa, because came with the ksher really fundamentally it's kosher. The idkar chazi have a chazi la'achila. So kamishmaya, Kadosh Baruch Hu knows the difference there. So we would not apply the Pesach Sheni rule of Abaye had it been that his distinction was listed on the Brisa and not on our Mishnah. We'll stop here at Amar Mar, 5 lines from the bottom. In Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow night, blot and a half, getting to the bottom of Tzadi Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.